There's a certain kind of magic in the voices that shaped American soul music, the kind that doesn't fade, even when the spotlight moves on. Before the world knew their harmonies, before the stages and the sold-out crowds, three men stood behind a microphone and created a sound so smooth, so perfectly blended, it became a signature of its own. That sound belonged to the Whispers, a group whose journey stretches across more than 5 decades, touching generations who found comfort, joy, and truth in their music. But how does a group with this much longevity, this much influence, still remain one of the most underrated treasures in R&B history? Let's get into their story right now. Let me know where you're watching this from in the comments. There's a certain kind of magic in the voices that shaped American soul music, the kind that doesn't fade, even when the spotlight moves on. Before the world knew their harmonies, before the stages and the sold-out crowds, three men stood behind a microphone and created a sound so smooth, so perfectly blended, it became a signature of its own. Long before the Whispers became a name carried across continents, their story began in the streets of Watts, California, where music was more than entertainment. It was escape, expression, and hope. Watts in 1965 was a place defined by struggle and resilience. Families were working hard to stay afloat, young people were searching for identity, and the community pulsed with the rhythms of gospel, jazz, and early soul. Within that world, a group of young men found themselves drawn together by something deeper than circumstance. They were bound by harmony. For identical twins, Wallace and Walter Scott, music was woven into their lives long before they stepped into any spotlight. They grew up singing in school programs, community gatherings, anywhere someone would listen. Their voices blended in a way only twins could achieve, two tones moving like one, an echo of shared experience and shared dreams. Grab yourself a warm drink, maybe a cup of water or tea, sit back, and let's start this journey together. Nicholas loved arranging harmonies, even as a teenager, fascinated by how voices could stack and fall into place like pieces of a puzzle. They sang together as a trio called the Eden Trio, building a quiet reputation in their school halls and local performances. All 5 of them attended David Starr Jordan High School, a place where talent shows were more than events, they were opportunities. On the night that changed everything, both groups were set to perform separately. Backstage, the twins were warming up, and just a few feet away, the trio was doing the same. The two sounds drifted toward each other, collided, and suddenly harmonized in a way none of them expected. It was unplanned, almost accidental, but unmistakably powerful. 5 voices, 1 sound. They knew immediately that something special had happened. Moments like that don't come often, the kind where you look around at the people near you and understand that your future just shifted. By the time they walked on stage, they were no longer 2 separate acts. The audience didn't know it yet, but they were witnessing the birth of what would become the Whispers. Their early days weren't glamorous. They practiced wherever they could, school stairwells with good acoustics, street corners, living rooms with 1 working lamp, and sometimes the empty gym after hours. They studied other groups, imitated harmonies, and then worked to create their own identity. By the time they walked on stage, they were no longer 2 separate acts. The audience didn't know it yet, but they were witnessing the birth of what would become the Whispers. Their early days weren't glamorous. They practiced wherever they could, school stairwells with good acoustics, street corners, living rooms with 1 working lamp, and sometimes the empty gym after hours. They studied other groups, imitated harmonies, and then worked to create their own identity. They kept rehearsing, kept performing, kept believing that their story hadn't ended before it began. During this period, something unexpected happened. They caught the attention of Lou Darrow of Door Records, a Los Angeles label known for discovering emerging talent. Impressed by their sound and dedication, he signed them and officially gave them the name the world would later know, the Whispers. The name reflected the soft, elegant texture of their harmonies, smooth, controlled, intimate. Between 1964 and 1967, the group recorded 9 singles for the label. They were young, still learning, but each session brought a new sense of identity. The studio became a classroom, microphones, a mirror. They started to understand how to shape their presence, control their tone, and bring life to a song beyond the note. A major turning point came in 1966 when they were invited to the Bay Area by Sly Stone. At a time when radio exposure in California was extremely competitive, Sly Stone saw their potential and helped them get airplay, something that could make or break a group in that era. With his support, their audience grew, and for the first time, they began to feel the momentum of real recognition. The Bay Area also shaped their performance identity. Crowds there demanded energy, passion, and professionalism. The Whispers delivered, and word spread quickly that they were more than a studio group, they were a show-stopping live act. It was the beginning of their rise, but still just the foundation of what they would become. In those early years, before hits and headlines, there were only 5 young men chasing a dream, carrying the weight of their community and their own hopes. And through every challenge, every uncertain moment, they stayed rooted in harmony. Between 1964 and 1967, the group recorded 9 singles for the label. They were young, still learning, but each session brought a new sense of identity. The studio became a classroom, microphones, a mirror. They started to understand how to shape their presence, control their tone, and bring life to a song beyond the note. A major turning point came in 1966 when they were invited to the Bay Area by Sly Stone. For them, discipline mattered as much as talent. They believed in being tight, being blended, being consistent. It was their foundation. But not long after they formed, life introduced its first challenge. Walter was drafted into the military and sent to serve in the Vietnam War. It was a moment that could have broken a young group. The loss of half of the twins, the perfect symmetry of their vocal signature, was heavy. Yet the remaining 4 members pushed forward. His voice would soon become the centerpiece of nearly all their future hits, a signature listeners could identify within seconds. After a string of singles under Door Records, the Whispers transitioned to Soul Clock Records in 1970, a smaller Los Angeles label run by producer Ron Carson. It was a new environment, not as established as other labels, but filled with opportunity. That same year, the Whispers released The Time Will Come, their first charted single. It was a modest success on paper, but it carried enormous meaning for a group still fighting to be heard in a crowded R&B world. The song showcased something audiences were beginning to recognize: the fluid, melodic voice of Scotty Scott. His tone glided effortlessly over every arrangement, warm and familiar, capable of carrying both tenderness and strength. It offered a broader canvas for them to explore their sound, smoother harmonies, tighter arrangements, a more defined identity. The album marked their first appearance on the Billboard 200 charts, peaking at number 48. For a young group competing with emerging titans of soul, this achievement signaled a quiet but undeniable momentum. In 1971, the Whispers moved again, this time to Janus Records, where they released their second album, The Whispers' Love Story, followed by Life and Breath in 1972. Each release refined their vocal chemistry. Each project strengthened their reputation as perfectionists who cared about every note, every harmony, every emotional nuance. But what truly set their early years apart wasn't just the music, it was their presence on stage. Throughout California, the Whispers gained a reputation as a show-stopping live act. They weren't dancers in the traditional sense, but their movements were deliberate, elegant, and synchronized a style that mirrored their harmonies. Their performances were polished yet heartfelt, bringing audiences into their world with every gesture and breath. In 1973, the group released A Mother for My Children, a soulful, aching single that connected with listeners on a deeply personal level. But just as their early momentum was building, life delivered another challenge. Gordy Harmon was injured in a car accident, and his departure forced the group to re-examine their dynamic. Change can fracture a young group, but for the Whispers, it became another test of their unity. They welcomed Laval Degree, a former member of Friends of Distinction, into the lineup. His smooth baritone blended seamlessly with the existing voices, adding new texture and warmth. What could have been a setback instead became a renewal. By the mid-1970, the Whispers had crafted a distinct identity, a disciplined, polished group with impeccable harmonies and a growing catalog of soulful music. Their early steps were not marked by overnight success, but by persistence, a steady climb fueled by work ethic, humility, and a belief that their moment would come. And it was closer than anyone realized. By the time the Whispers entered the mid-1970s, they had already weathered enough challenges to break most young groups. But instead of slowing down, each setback seemed to sharpen their focus. They knew who they were. They knew the sound they carried. What they needed now was the right platform and the right moment. That moment arrived when they signed with Soul Train Records in the later part of the decade, just before the label evolved into Solar Records. This shift would become one of the most important turning points in their entire career. Soul Train Records wasn't just a label, it was a movement. It represented a new era for black artists, visually bold, musically vibrant, and culturally unapologetic. For the Whispers, it was the perfect match. Under this new home, their sound blossomed. Songs like One for the Money, Living Together, and Make It With You began drawing national attention. These weren't just singles, they were statements of confidence. They carried a polished blend of R&B and early funk, wrapped in the tight harmonies that had become their signature. Audiences began to notice the difference. The group was more mature now, more certain of their identity, more commanding on stage. Their live shows became the talk of the West Coast. Reviewers described them as electric without trying, smooth without effort, and flawlessly synchronized. The Whispers didn't rely on flashy choreography. Instead, they moved as if the music passed through them first, guiding every gesture. Their harmonies glided over the crowd like silk. Their professionalism set them apart. They were becoming a group that didn't just perform, they transported people. Still, they were missing one thing, a true breakout. Then came the late 1970. With Solar Records behind them, the creative chemistry between the group and the label reached its peak. Producers who understood their sound, who respected the subtlety of their harmonies, pushed them into a new era. The Whispers were no longer just another talented R&B group. They were evolving into a force, a bridge between classic soul and the emerging sounds of a new generation. Their singles began charting more consistently. Their albums were reaching higher numbers, and slowly, the rest of the country began catching up to what West Coast audiences already knew. This group was special. The real turning point wasn't just commercial, it was emotional. For the first time, the Whispers felt the industry leaning toward them rather than the other way around. Their persistence, years of touring, years of recording, years of trusting their craft, was finally paying off. There was a new confidence in their music, a new spark in their performances, a sense that something bigger was coming. They didn't know it yet, but they were standing at the edge of their golden era, a period that would produce some of the most unforgettable songs in R&B history, elevate their status to national icons, and cement the Whispers as one of the greatest underrated groups America ever produced. The breakthrough was coming. They could feel it. And soon, the whole world would too. By the time the Whispers stepped into the late 1970, the stage lights seemed to glow a little brighter for them. Everything they had built, the discipline, the craftsmanship, the patience, was finally aligning. And when their self-titled album, The Whispers, arrived, it didn't just mark a milestone, it marked the beginning of their reign. The album soared to number 6 on the Billboard 200 and reached number 1 on the Billboard Top R&B Albums chart. It didn't just perform well, it went platinum. The Whispers had crossed a threshold that few groups from their era ever reached. They weren't climbing anymore. They were standing on solid, undeniable ground. And The Beat Goes On, one of the album's defining singles, became an anthem that captured the spirit of the time. Its rhythm was elegant, yet infectious, modern but rooted in soul. The moment the opening groove hit the airwaves, it was clear this was more than a song, it was a statement. It introduced the Whispers to audiences who had never experienced their music before, and it cemented their place as leaders in the new R&B landscape. But they were far from done. Next came Imagination in 1980, an album that glowed with warmth and sophistication. It peaked at number 23 on the Billboard 200 and number 3 on the R&B chart, earning a gold certification. Songs like It's a Love Thing and Imagination revealed a group at full creative power, confident, polished, and effortlessly soulful. Their harmonies wrapped around listeners like velvet. Each note felt intentional. Each lyric carried weight. It was music that didn't demand attention, it deserved it. Their following project, Love Is Where You Find It, continued the momentum. Another number 1 on the R&B chart, another gold certification. The Whispers had mastered a formula that blended romantic storytelling, rich arrangements, and a vocal chemistry unmatched by their peers. They created soundtracks for weddings, living room dances, late-night drives, and tender memories people still carry today. Then came Just Gets Better with Time in 1987, an album title that, in many ways, defined their career. It rose to number 22 on the Billboard 200, number 3 on the R&B chart, and earned another platinum plaque. And at its center was Rock Steady, the hit that pushed them into the top 10 of the pop charts for the first time. It was a song that didn't just cross genres, it crossed generations. It became a cultural marker, a timeless groove that still fills dance floors decades later. During this era, the Whispers weren't just releasing successful albums, they were shaping the sound of American R&B. Their blend of classic soul, smooth harmonies, and modern production created a bridge between the old and the new, giving their music a rare, timeless quality. Younger artists looked up to them. Radio embraced them. Fans across the country packed venues just for a chance to hear those harmonies live. These were the years when everything aligned: the acclaim, the sales, the respect, and the artistic mastery. The Whispers were at the top of their world, standing beneath lights that finally reflected the full depth of their talent. Their peak wasn't loud or chaotic. It was graceful, powerful, and built on everything they had fought for. At the height of their success, when the Whispers were filling theaters, climbing charts, and hearing their songs echo through radio stations across the country, something subtle began to surface beneath the applause. Success can be bright, but it often casts long shadows, and within those shadows, the first signs of strain started to appear. The music industry was shifting. R&B was evolving, disco was transforming into new forms, and younger acts were emerging with flashier images and faster rhythms. Even as the Whispers continued releasing hit after hit, they faced a quiet, unspoken truth. The industry didn't always celebrate artists who played the long game. Longevity is admired by the public, but in the boardrooms and label offices, the attention often turns toward whatever feels new, whatever feels immediate. Despite their platinum plaques and chart-topping singles, the Whispers sometimes found themselves overlooked in conversations about the most influential groups of their time. They were respected, even loved, by audiences, but the industry didn't always place them on the same pedestal as other major acts. It was a contradiction, standing at the top, yet still feeling the weight of being underrated. And beyond the industry, the personal pressures of fame began revealing themselves. Years of touring, interviews, album cycles, rehearsals, and the constant expectation to perform at their best took a toll. Audiences saw the polished harmonies and graceful movements, but behind the scenes, exhaustion lingered. The Whispers were consummate professionals, but even professionals carry human limits. For Marcus Hudson, those limits became harder to hide. As the group continued to push forward, health issues quietly began shaping his reality. Marcus, known for his warmth and presence, started experiencing physical struggles that made performing increasingly difficult. His illness was not immediately public, and the Whispers, always protective of one another, guarded his privacy with loyalty and love. But it was clear that something was shifting. Meanwhile, musical trends in the mid to late 1980 were changing rapidly. The rise of New Jack Swing, the growing influence of hip-hop, and the shift toward younger, image-driven R&B groups created a landscape where traditional soul acts had to fight for space. The Whispers never compromised their identity. They stayed true to their harmonies, their elegance, their storytelling, but staying true often meant swimming upstream. As Rock Steady climbed the charts and brought them their highest mainstream success, the irony was almost poetic. At the very moment the Whispers were achieving the kind of crossover hit that many groups dream of, the foundation beneath them was beginning to crack. Fame was not protecting them from real life. It never does. The seeds of tragedy were not loud or dramatic. They were quiet moments of fatigue, private battles, small absences, subtle shifts in energy. They were the kind of signs that only appear in hindsight, when you look back and see the trail of things you didn't notice at the time. Even in their golden era, the Whispers were learning a truth that every great artist eventually faces. Success can illuminate, but it can also expose. And the more brightly a group shines, the more visible the shadows become. They were standing on the highest peak of their career, but the descent, slow, unspoken, and inevitable, had already begun. By the early 1990s, the glow surrounding the Whispers was still warm, but a quiet shift had begun to settle over their journey. Fame, even at its brightest, cannot keep life from moving in its own direction. And for the members of the group, men who had spent decades pouring their hearts into music, the weight of time began to show itself in ways they could no longer ignore. The industry around them was changing at a relentless pace. Younger acts filled the airwaves. New sounds pushed their way into the mainstream. And though the Whispers remained respected, their style, rooted in harmony, elegance, and emotional storytelling, was no longer the center of the commercial spotlight. That shift alone was unsettling, but it was not the true crisis they were facing. The real turning point came from within. Marcus Hudson, one of the group's founding pillars, had been struggling quietly for years. What began as fatigue during shows slowly grew into something deeper, something harder to hide. The stage, which had always been a place of joy and power for him, began to feel heavier under his feet. The Whispers were a family long before they were a group, and they sensed the change in him not because he said it, but because they knew his energy, his presence, his spirit. He was fighting an illness that was never meant to be part of his story, and yet, there it was, shaping his days and stealing pieces of his strength. The group protected him fiercely. They didn't make announcements. They didn't share details. They didn't want the world to see him through the lens of his condition. They wanted him to remain Marcus, the warm voice, the grounded presence, the brother who helped build their sound from the very beginning. But behind the scenes, performances became more difficult. Traveling grew exhausting. Even rehearsals, once filled with laughter and shared creativity, required more energy than he could give. In 1992, Marcus made the heartbreaking decision to step away from the Whispers. It wasn't a departure born of conflict or disappointment. It was necessity, a choice made out of dignity and honesty. He knew he couldn't offer the consistency that the group's demanding schedule required. The Whispers understood. They didn't argue. They didn't try to persuade him otherwise. They loved him too deeply for that. Losing a founding member after nearly 3 decades of harmony was a silent kind of grief. It wasn't loud or public. It was the kind of grief that sits in the back of your throat when you hear a missing note during rehearsal, or when you glance to the side of the stage and see an empty place where someone once stood. But the crisis didn't end there. Around the same time, the music business itself became more uncertain. Radio was shifting. Labels were pushing for younger faces, and long-standing groups like the Whispers were expected to fight for the space they once filled effortlessly. Every album required more negotiation. Every tour demanded more sacrifice. Every moment on stage became a reminder of how fragile longevity truly is. Yet through all of it, the illness, the fatigue, the changing landscape, the Whispers held on to the bond they had always relied on. Because when the world around them grew unpredictable, harmony remained the one constant they could trust. When Marcus Hudson stepped away from the Whispers, the group didn't just lose a voice, they lost a presence, a heartbeat, a piece of themselves that had shaped their sound since the beginning. And although they tried to carry on with the same grace and unity that defined their early years, something felt different. The stage, once filled with the comfort of routine, now carried a quiet emptiness. Harmony had always been their anchor, but now even harmony sounded different. The music industry, meanwhile, was moving faster than ever. Radio programmers were shifting toward new trends. Labels were investing heavily in emerging acts. And many veteran groups found themselves pushed into the margins, treated as relics instead of contributors. The Whispers, despite their platinum success and their undeniable influence, were not exempt from this cold reality. They had the talent, they had the history, but the industry's attention had drifted elsewhere. Touring became more challenging. Some venues were smaller, some crowds thinner, and even when the shows were strong, the business behind them was becoming more unpredictable. Promoters wanted the next big thing, not the group that had spent decades delivering consistent excellence. It wasn't rejection, but it was indifference, and indifference can cut deeper than criticism. Inside the group, the emotional toll compounded. They continued recording, releasing albums, and fighting for space on an ever-changing landscape, but the process carried more weight. Every photo shoot felt like it was missing someone. Every interview required them to carefully dance around the subject of Marcus's absence, wanting to honor him without turning his struggle into a headline. When Marcus passed away in 2000 after battling prostate cancer, the loss rippled far beyond the music. The Whispers made a promise, one that reflected not only loyalty, but integrity. They would never replace him. In a world that often treats artists as interchangeable, this decision was an act of love. It was a statement that Marcus was not just a member, he was family. But the consequences of losing him stretched further than the emotional space he once filled. His absence reshaped their sound, their staging, their energy. And while the remaining members carried on with strength, the grief never fully left. The Whispers had always been known for their unity, and now their unity had to survive with one less voice. During this period, the industry's focus continued drifting away from classic R&B groups. Touring sustained them, but it came with long nights, heavy travel, and the unspoken knowledge that time was beginning to weigh on all of them. The calls from major labels were fewer, the radio play was lighter, and yet their fans still showed up loyal, steady, and grateful. That loyalty became a lifeline. The consequences of this era were not explosive or dramatic. They were subtle, heavy, and human. A shifting industry, a missing brother, a changing world. And amid it all, the Whispers continued to sing, holding on to the harmony they had built together, even as life slowly changed the shape of the group. Because for them, the music was more than a career. It was a promise one they refused to break. When people talk about longevity in American music, they often mention artists who defined eras, shaped trends, or reinvented themselves with each decade. Yet few groups embody the quiet strength of endurance the way the Whispers do. Their legacy isn't loud or aggressively claimed. It lives in the spaces between harmonies, in the gentle ease of their delivery, and in the way their music has aged with grace, steady, unforced, and unmistakably theirs. What made their legacy so enduring begins with their sound. The Whispers created a vocal blueprint built on precision, balance, and emotional clarity. The blend between Walter and Scotty Scott, that genetically perfect symmetry, became a kind of sonic signature no other group could duplicate. Their harmonies didn't compete, they supported, they intertwined, they lifted each other like a single breath shared between brothers. It was a form of unity that audiences felt immediately, even before they learned the names behind the voices. Their catalog helped define modern R&B. Songs like "And the Beat Goes On," "It's a Love Thing," and "Rocksteady" didn't just climb charts, they shaped dance floors, inspired young vocalists, and influenced the evolution of the genre itself. Younger groups studied their phrasing. Producers referenced their smooth transitions and controlled delivery. Dancers created routines built around the grooves. The Whispers made timeless. Their influence spread quietly, but it never disappeared. And then there was the professionalism. The Whispers approached the stage as a sacred place. Their movements were synchronized yet subtle, refined but never rigid. They wore their suits with the dignity of men who believed the audience deserved their best every night. They represented a generation of performers who treated music as both art and responsibility. In an era before social media, before shortcuts and overnight fame, their work ethic became part of their identity. Their impact reached beyond the charts and into the heart of American black culture. The Whispers became a soundtrack to weddings, anniversaries, backyard cookouts, and late-night conversations. Their music accompanied first loves, heartbreaks, family memories, and road trips across state lines. They weren't just artists, they were part of the tradition, woven into everyday life with a familiarity that made their songs timeless. Their endurance across decades is a testament to something rare: consistency without compromise. While other groups shifted their style to match trends, the Whispers stayed true to who they were. They updated their sound, yes, but they never abandoned the warm harmonies and grounded storytelling that shaped their earliest recordings. That unshakable identity became part of their legacy, a reminder that staying authentic can be just as powerful as reinventing yourself. And the industry took notice, even if recognition came later than deserved. Beginning in 2003, accolades started honoring the weight of their contributions. The Whispers were inducted into the Vocal Group Hall of Fame. The Grammy Awards San Francisco chapter presented them with the Governor's Award in 2005, acknowledging not just their music but their influence. The Bay Area Blues Society welcomed them into its Hall of Fame in 2006. The Black Music Academy named them Living Legends. The Rhythm and Blues Foundation honored them with the Pioneer Award in 2008. More tributes followed each one, a recognition of 5 decades of excellence. Their legacy also extends into community work. Even during demanding touring schedules, the Whispers made time to support youth programs, cancer awareness organizations, domestic violence charities, and groups dedicated to supporting young Black men. Their philanthropy wasn't performed for cameras or publicity. It came from a genuine belief that success means little if you don't carry others with you. Younger groups studied their phrasing. Producers referenced their smooth transitions and controlled delivery. Dancers created routines built around the grooves. The Whispers made timeless. Their influence spread quietly, but it never disappeared. And then there was the professionalism. The Whispers approached the stage as a sacred place. Their movements were synchronized yet subtle, refined but never rigid. When Nicholas Caldwell passed away in 2016 from congestive heart failure, it marked another painful chapter in a journey already touched by loss. His voice, his elegance, and his gentle presence had been pillars of the group's character. For longtime fans, his passing felt like losing a piece of their own memories. His absence was not just felt, it echoed. Then, 7 years later, in 2023, Gordy Harmon, one of the original founding members, passed away at the age of 79. The story of the Whispers is not just about music. It's about what happens when devotion, discipline, and heart are carried across a lifetime. Their legacy isn't defined by one hit or one era. It's defined by the steady way they touched people, year after year, song after song. As the years moved forward, the reflections on the Whispers grew deeper, shaped not only by their achievements but by the changes life brought to the group. Fans, musicians, radio hosts, and cultural historians began speaking more openly about their impact, how their songs defined decades, how their professionalism set a standard, and how their harmonies became a classroom for generations of vocal groups. In many ways, the Whispers were finally receiving the recognition that had eluded them during their prime. Around the world, their influence remained steady. In the United States, their concerts continued to sell out, especially in cities rich with soul and R&B history: Chicago, Detroit, Philadelphia, Atlanta, Los Angeles. But the reach of the Whispers extended far beyond American borders. In Europe, audiences treated them with a reverence usually reserved for classical performers. In the United Kingdom, their shows drew multi-generational families, grandparents who grew up dancing to "And the Beat Goes On," parents who fell in love to Lady, and younger fans who discovered rock steady through samples and remixes. Their music moved through time like an heirloom passed from hand to hand. In Asia and Africa, their tours surprised even the group. Fans knew every lyric, every harmony line. Some had only encountered their music through old vinyl records or late-night radio broadcasts. But when the Whispers stepped on stage, even as a trio, the response was overwhelming. Thousands of voices rose in unison, a testament to how far their sound had traveled without the push of modern marketing or viral moments. As scholars and cultural writers revisited the evolution of Black American music, the Whispers found themselves placed in a new context. They weren't simply survivors of multiple decades. They were connectors artists who bridged the gap between soul, quiet storm, funk, and modern R&B. Their consistency became a case study. Their harmonic identity became a reference point, and their durability became a symbol of resilience in an industry that often consumes its own. Looking back from the modern era, the story of the Whispers reveals something rare, a legacy that was not built on controversy or spectacle, but on discipline, unity, humility, and love for the craft. They endured not because the industry protected them, but because they protected each other. They evolved not by chasing trends, but by honoring the sound that brought them together. And as time continues to move forward, one truth stands firm: the Whispers were never forgotten. They were simply waiting for the world to catch up to the greatness that had always been there. When you look back at the long arc of their story, it's impossible not to return to that opening image: 3 men standing beneath dim stage lights, their voices blending softly like a memory that refuses to fade. The years have moved on. The world has changed. and entire generations have come and gone. Yet the sound of the Whispers remains as steady as the name they chose all those decades ago. Their harmonies were never built for shock or spectacle. They were built to last. From the hallways of Jordan High School to international stages filled with thousands of loyal fans, their journey is a reminder that greatness doesn't always shout. Sometimes it moves quietly, with dignity, carried by craftsmanship and love for the art. The Whispers never chased trends, never bent themselves to fit whatever the industry demanded. They trusted who they were. They trusted the harmony that held them together. And because of that, they created a timeless body of work that outlived every era they passed through. Their legacy is found not only in platinum plaques or charting singles, but in the lives their music touched, in family gatherings where "It's a Love Thing" played while people danced together, in late-night drives accompanied by "Lady," in the countless weddings, anniversaries, and gentle moments shaped by their melodies. Their songs became part of the emotional landscape of American life, steady, familiar, and full of heart. But as much as their story is about music, it's also about resilience. It's about weathering change, standing firm when the spotlight dims, and holding on to the people who helped build the dream from the beginning. Through loss, illness, industry shifts, and the passage of time, the Whispers kept singing. They held on to the bond that made them more than a group. They were brothers. They were family. And today, as audiences look back with clearer eyes and fuller hearts, it's easier to see the truth. The Whispers were never just a part of the soundtrack of their era. They were architects of it. So now the question becomes yours. Do you think Hollywood ever gave the Whispers the respect they truly deserved? If their story touched a part of your memory or brought back a song you haven't heard in years, share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us where you first heard them, what their music meant to you, or which song still plays in the soundtrack of your life. And if you believe stories like theirs should never be forgotten, hit that subscribe button and stay with us. Because here on Stars Underrated, we remember the legends the world didn't celebrate enough. Some stars fade when the lights go out. The Whispers proved that some shine even brighter in the quiet.